So, last time, we saw the Ottoman state really claw its way back from the brink. They survived Timur, they got through that decade of civil war,
Yeah.
and they came out of it stronger, but there was still this one thing, this generational obsession that they hadn't achieved.
That's exactly right. They controlled all this territory in Anatolia, in Europe, but the empire just felt, well, incomplete. They had the power, they had the army, but they didn't have the grand prize.
And that prize was Constantinople, the Queen of Cities. This city had stood for more than 1,000 years as the capital of the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire. And it survived almost entirely because of its legendary Theodosian Walls.
It was more than just a city, you see. It was the ultimate symbol of legitimacy. If you could take Constantinople, you weren't just getting a new capital. You were claiming the mantle of the Roman Empire itself.
You're basically saying, we are the new Rome.
Precisely. You're ending an empire that traced its lineage all the way back to Augustus. It was the trophy that would validate you on the world stage forever.
And the man who finally made it happen, who had this almost manic fixation on it, he takes the throne in 1451. And he's only 19 years old, Sultan Mehmed II.
He was a force of nature, incredibly educated, intensely ambitious, and just completely consumed by this one single goal: breach those ancient walls.
So in this deep dive, we're going to look at that moment, the fall of Constantinople, but then we're going to push forward into the absolute peak of Ottoman power. We'll get into the ruthless expansion under Selim the Grim.
And then the Golden Age, the military and cultural peak under Suleiman the Magnificent.
And we're also going to look behind the palace walls at the intense human drama, the love, the ambition, the betrayals that really shaped this entire era.
Okay, so let's start with Mehmed II. He's 19 when he takes power, but he's not. He's not just some young hothead. He was seriously prepared for this.
Oh, completely. You could almost call him a Renaissance prince in that sense. His intellectual preparation was, frankly, extraordinary.
What do we mean by that?
Well, for starters, we know he was fluent in at least 6 languages.
Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, and Serbian. And this wasn't just a hobby. It meant he could study the history and philosophy of his enemies in their own words. He studied military strategy, especially siegecraft, obsessively.
And all of that brainpower was focused on one place. The sources really paint a picture of an obsession that goes beyond just politics.
It was almost manic. This was a constant waking thought for him. He would draw his own plans, study every map he could find.
So he was personally involved in the planning?
Deeply. He would interrogate travelers, merchants, prisoners, anyone who had been inside the city, just to understand the layout, the currents in the harbor, and of course any potential weakness in the walls. The chroniclers say he'd sometimes wake up in the middle of the night just thinking about the walls.
And we have to talk about those walls, the Theodosian Walls. To really get what a huge deal this was, you have to understand what he was up against.
They were probably the greatest defensive system built before the modern era. I mean, they were an engineering marvel, a triple line of fortifications. Yes. So first, an attacker would have to cross this huge 60-foot wide moat, all while under fire.
Okay.
If you get past that, you face the low outer wall, then a middle terrace, and then finally the main event, the inner wall. 40 feet high, 15 feet thick, and dotted with 96 massive towers.
And these walls had worked. For 1,000 years, they'd stopped everyone.
Everyone. Avars, Persians, Arab caliphates, the Rus, you name it. They had been tested time and time again, and they had never, ever failed.
So to Mehmed, this wasn't a problem he could solve with ladders and battering rams. He needed to change the rules of the game.
Exactly. He needed a technological leap. He needed gunpowder.
Which brings us to one of history's great painful ironies, the Hungarian engineer Orban.
It's a classic what-if story. Orban was a master cannon founder. He knew how to build these new, massive bronze guns, and he went to the Byzantine emperor first.
Of course. He offered his services to the defenders.
He did. But the Byzantine treasury was empty. They were broke. They couldn't afford his price.
That's just catastrophic. The fate of an empire comes down to a budget meeting.
So Orban crosses the Bosphorus, goes to Mehmed, and the Sultan, with his endless ambition and, more importantly, endless money, gives him everything he wants.
And Orban promises him a cannon that could, well, it was a quote,
batter the walls of Babylon itself.
And he delivered. He built Basilica. Let's just talk about the sheer scale of this weapon.
It was a monster,
Okay.
27 feet long, and it fired stone cannonballs that weighed over half a ton.
Half a ton. I can't even picture that. But just building it is one thing. How do you even move something like that?
With extreme difficulty. It took a team of 60 oxen and 400 men just to move it. They could only cover a few miles a day. It was a massive logistical operation in itself.
What about firing it?
That was a whole other challenge. The metallurgy was so primitive it had to cool down for hours between shots or the barrel would crack. The reload time was about 3 hours for one shot.
So it's not rapid fire.
Not at all. But it's this relentless, terrifying pounding. That, plus dozens of smaller cannons all firing day after day, those ancient walls were just not built for that kind of punishment.
And beyond the cannon, he was meticulous about the rest of the siege.
He left nothing to chance. He assembled this huge army, maybe 80,000 men or more. He had a massive fleet to blockade the city by sea. And crucially, he built a fortress on the Bosphorus, Rum al-Hisari, the fortress of Europe.
And he built it fast.
In just 4 months, it gave him a total chokehold on the strait, cutting off any hope of reinforcement or supplies for Constantinople from the Black Sea.
So by early 1453, the city is completely cut off.
Yeah.
And the numbers are just grim.
Grim is the word. Against Mehmed's massive army, the city had maybe 7,000 defenders total. That includes about 2,000 foreign volunteers, Genoese and Venetians who knew what was at stake. But the math was just impossible.
So April 6, 1453, the siege begins. And those great cannons with Basilica leading the way start to fire. You're literally hearing the end of the Roman Empire.
The sound must have been terrifying. The chronicles describe the whole city shuddering with each impact. Seeing these 1,000-year-old walls, the symbol of permanence, actually cracking and crumbling, it must have been a devastating psychological blow.
But the defenders, they didn't just give up. Emperor Constantine the Aleph refused to surrender.
He saw it as a fight for his faith, for his city. He told his people it was better to die free. And they fought back with incredible bravery. Every single night, they would go out and desperately try to repair the breaches, filling them with rubble, wood, anything they could find, just trying to hold on for one more day.
But the Ottomans had another problem, right? The sea approach. The Golden Horn Harbor was protected
by that massive chain. An enormous iron chain stretched across the mouth of the harbor. It completely stopped Mehmed's fleet. It was their one great naval defense, and it worked.
And this is where Mehmed does something that just cements his legend as a military genius. He decides if he can't sail past the chain,
he'll go overland.
It sounds impossible.
It's one of the most incredible logistical feats in history. He ordered his men to build a road of wooden tracks 7 miles long around the Genoese colony of Galata. They coated the tracks in grease and animal fat.
Right.
And then overnight, using teams of oxen and hundreds of men, they dragged 70 of his ships, full-size warships, up a hill, across the tracks, and down into the harbor on the other side.
What was the reaction inside the city?
Pure shock. Imagine waking up one morning, looking out at your secure harbor, and seeing the enemy's entire fleet just sitting there. The chain, their ultimate defense, was now useless. Their flank was exposed. Morale just plummeted.
Still, the siege dragged on for 53 days. That Genoese commander, Giovanni Giustiniani, he must have been brilliant.
He was the key. He organized the defense, he managed the repairs, he held the line. But time was running out, Mehmed was getting frustrated, and on May 29th, he launched the final all-out assault.
And it was a smart assault, designed to just wear the defenders out.
Exactly. It was a war of attrition, in waves. First, he sent in the irregulars, the AZAPs, basically cannon fodder, to absorb the first counterattacks and make the defenders waste energy and ammunition.
Then the next wave.
Then the Anatolian troops.
Yeah.
And only then, when the defenders were on their last legs, exhausted and barely able to stand, did he send in his elite troops, the Janissaries.
And then it all falls apart for the defense.
Ugly.
It seems like it was 2 things happening at almost the exact same time.
A perfect storm of disaster. First, Giustiniani, the commander, the man holding it all together, is seriously wounded and carried off the walls. His men see him leave, and they panic.
And at that exact moment, the cake.
The Turcoporta Gate, a tiny little side gate, a postern. Someone had left it unlocked.
Unbelievable. An accident. Or was it betrayal?
We'll never know for sure. But a small group of Ottoman soldiers found it, poured through, climbed up the inner wall, and raised the Ottoman banners. Once the defenders saw those flags flying inside the city, it was over. The defense just collapsed into chaos.
And what happened to the last Roman emperor, Constantine XI?
He died a soldier. Seeing that it was lost, he reportedly threw off his purple imperial robes and charged into the thickest of the fighting. He died anonymously, fighting alongside his men. His body was never definitively identified.
So on that day, May 29th, 1453, the Roman Empire, after more than 2,000 years, finally ended.
It did. Mehmed rode into the city that afternoon straight to the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral, and claimed it as a mosque. He allowed 1 day of looting, which was customary, but then he stopped it.
Why? I thought 3 days was the tradition.
Because he didn't want to ruin. He wanted a magnificent, functioning capital. This was going to be the center of his world empire. He famously said, in a line of poetry, "The spider weaves the curtains in the palace of the Caesars. The owl calls the watches in the towers of Afrasiab. The old world was gone. A new one had begun."
After the conquest, Mehmed's ambition just exploded. He didn't just want to be a sultan. He claimed a title that was a lot bigger.
He did. He took the title Kayser-i Rum, Caesar of Rome.
So he wasn't saying he destroyed Rome. He was saying he was Rome.
Exactly. He was claiming that the Ottoman Empire was the legitimate continuation of the Roman tradition, that he was the true successor to Constantine, and the so-called Holy Roman Emperor in the West was just a pretender.
That is a massive political statement. How did that go over in Europe?
About as well as you'd expect. It was seen as an existential threat, but his statecraft was just brilliant. He knew he had millions of new Greek Orthodox subjects, and he needed their loyalty.
So what did he do?
He immediately reestablished the Orthodox Church. He brought the Greek patriarch back to Constantinople and placed the church under his official protection.
Why protect the religion of the people you just conquered?
It was a masterstroke. It told the Orthodox population, "I will protect you from the Catholic West," who they deeply distrusted, especially after the Fourth Crusade. It secured their loyalty and ensured stability across his new European territories.
And at the same time, he starts this massive project to rebuild the city, now called Istanbul.
Istanbul became his life's work. He launched a huge repopulation program, moving Muslims, Christians, and Jews from all over the empire into the city. He built the Grand Bazaar, mosques, baths, schools.
He was building a world capital from the ground up.
And he did it incredibly quickly. By the end of his reign, Istanbul was once again one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities on Earth.
But he didn't stop conquering. He kept pushing into Europe.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
He finished conquering Serbia, Bosnia, Albania. He fought long wars with Venice to control the Aegean Sea.
But he wasn't invincible. He had one major failure.
The Siege of Belgrade in 1456. Belgrade was the gateway to Central Europe, and he threw everything he had at it. But he was defeated by a Hungarian army led by John Hunyadi. It was a huge setback for him.
And yet his final ambition was the biggest of all. He wasn't just aiming for Central Europe, he was aiming for Rome itself.
In 1480, he launched an invasion of Italy. His forces captured the city of Otranto, and this wasn't a raid, it was a foothold. There was genuine panic across Europe. The Pope was apparently preparing to flee Rome.
The threat was that real.
It was that real. The capture of Rome would have been the ultimate validation of his title as Caesar. But what stopped it wasn't a great European army. It was biology.
Mehmed's death.
He died in 1481 at just 49, possibly poisoned. And as soon as he died, the Italian campaign just stopped. His forces pulled out of Otranto. It was one of history's great what-ifs.
Okay, so after Mehmed, his successor, Bayezid II, was a lot more cautious. But the next generation, that brought a completely different kind of ruler. Selim the Grim. Selim the Grim.
Yeah, that nickname really tells you everything you need to know about his style.
His rise to power was just brutal.
Utterly. He forced his own father to abdicate, and his father died very shortly after, probably poisoned. Then Selim immediately set about executing all his rivals, his brothers, his nephews, anyone who could possibly challenge him.
This practice of fratricide was becoming a horrifying Ottoman tradition, but it served a very clear political purpose, didn't it?
It did. As brutal as it was a tool to ensure stability. Selim made sure that when he went on campaign, he didn't have to worry about a coup or a civil war back home. It allowed him to focus the empire's entire power outward.
And he did. In just 8 years, he doubled the size of the empire. But he looked east and south, not west.
His first target was the Safavid Empire in Persia. And this was more than just a land dispute. This was a deep religious conflict.
Explain that. Why were the Safavids such a threat?
The Safavids were devout Shia Muslims, and they were trying to spread their faith into the Sunni Ottoman lands. For Selim, as a Sunni ruler, this was a direct challenge to his religious legitimacy. So he met them at the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514 and crushed them.
Yeah.
Superior technology, his gunpowder armies, his janissaries and artillery just decimated the traditional Safavid cavalry. It settled the issue, at least for a while.
So with his eastern flank secure, he turned south to the Mamluk Sultanate.
At the time, the Mamluks were the dominant power in the Middle East. They controlled Egypt, Syria, and most importantly, the holy cities of Mecca and Medina.
And Selim destroyed this centuries-old empire in just 2 years. How did they collapse so fast?
It was the same story, really. The Mamluks had this incredibly proud, skilled cavalry, but they had no answer for Ottoman muskets and cannons. Their charges were brave, but they were suicidal. They were just mown down.
And conquering Egypt wasn't just about territory. It was about money.
Huge money. He seized control of the Red Sea spice routes. All that wealth from India and the East now flowed through Ottoman Alexandria. It made the empire incredibly rich overnight.
But the biggest prize was religious, the holy cities.
Yes, Mecca and Medina accepted his rule. The Sharif of Mecca sent him the keys to the Kaaba. Suddenly, the Ottoman Sultan was the official guardian of Islam's holiest sites. His prestige in the Muslim world skyrocketed.
And he took the ultimate title.
He claimed the title of Caliph, successor to the Prophet Muhammad. This gave the Ottomans religious authority that they would hold for the next 400 years.
So when Selim died in 1520, he left behind an empire that was bigger, richer, and more powerful than ever before.
He did. It stretched from the Balkans to the Nile. He had consolidated a superstate that was perfectly primed for its absolute golden age.
And the man who inherits this superstate is Selim's only son, Suleiman. He comes to the throne in 1520 and goes on to rule for 46 years, the longest and arguably the greatest reign in Ottoman history.
Suleiman really is a figure of two halves. In the West, we know him as Suleiman the Magnificent for his conquests, his court, his sheer splendor.
Right.
But in the Islamic world, he's known as Suleiman the Lawgiver Kanuni for his legal reforms.
Let's start with the magnificent part, the conquests. He immediately goes after the one prize that eluded his great-grandfather, Mehmed.
Belgrade. He captures it in 1521. It was a huge symbolic victory, and it opened up the gateway to Central Europe.
Yeah.
Then he takes the island of Rhodes from the Knights Hospitaller, clearing out a major Christian naval base.
And then comes the big one, the conquest that really redraws the map of Europe, Hungary.
The Battle of Mohacs in 1526. It was a lightning victory. The Ottoman army just annihilated the Hungarian army in a couple of hours. The Hungarian king drowned trying to escape. And just like that, Hungary ceased to exist as an independent kingdom.
Which puts the Ottoman army right on the doorstep of the Habsburgs and leads directly to the furthest west they ever reached, the Siege of Vienna in 1529.
That was the high water mark. The Ottoman army at the gates of the Habsburg capital. It sent a shockwave across all of Christendom.
But the siege failed. And it wasn't because of some heroic defense, was it? It was much more mundane.
It was logistics and weather, a classic case of an army outrunning its supply lines. Suleiman started the campaign too late in the year.
So what happened?
The autumn rains came. The roads across the Balkans turned into a sea of mud, and his heavy siege cannons, the weapons he needed to break the walls.
They got stuck.
They got hopelessly stuck in the mud. He had to leave many of them behind. By the time he even got to Vienna, his army was exhausted, low on supplies, and missing its most important weapons.
So after just a few weeks, with winter coming on, he had no choice but to turn back.
Exactly. Vienna was saved by the mud. But even though the siege failed, the threat was now permanent. The idea that the Turks could be at the gates of Vienna defined European politics for the next 150 years.
So while Suleiman is dealing with mud in Austria, he's also building this incredible naval power, thanks to one of the most colorful characters of the era, Herod Barbarossa.
Barbarossa, or Redbeard. He started his career as a corsair, a pirate, based out of North Africa. He and his brother built their own pirate state in Algiers.
It seems wild that the Sultan would team up with a pirate.
It was pure pragmatism. The Mediterranean was heavily contested by Spain and Venice. Barbarossa had the ships, he had the skills, and he offered them to Suleiman. In return for becoming an Ottoman vassal, he gave the Sultan a ready-made navy in the Western Mediterranean.
And Suleiman didn't just accept him, he promoted him.
He made him Kaptan Pasha, Lord Admiral of the entire Ottoman fleet, an incredible rise.
From pirate to Lord Admiral.
And he immediately proved his worth. He used his pirate tactics combined with the empire's resources. His fleet conquered Tunis and launched devastating raids on the coasts of Italy and Spain.
But his biggest moment was the Battle of Preveza in 1538. This was him against basically all of Christian Europe's navies combined.
It was a Holy League of Spain, Venice, the Papal States, Genoa. A massive fleet sent to destroy him.
And what happened?
He destroyed them. His tactical genius was on full display. He used his faster, more agile galleys to outmaneuver the bigger Christian ships. The Christian fleet lost dozens of ships. Barbarossa, incredibly, lost none.
So after that battle, Ottoman naval dominance was total.
For the rest of Suleiman's reign, yes, they controlled the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf. Their naval power even projected into the Indian Ocean, with Ottoman ships raiding as far away as India. It was absolutely crucial for protecting the trade routes that made the empire so wealthy.
Okay, let's shift back to the other side of Suleiman. Not the conqueror, but the lawgiver, Kanuni. This is about how he actually governed this massive, diverse empire.
And it's just as important as the conquests. He knew you couldn't hold an empire like this together with force alone. You needed order. You needed a system. So he oversaw the creation of this comprehensive legal code, the Qanun.
What was so special about this code?
It's balance. It governed all the secular stuff, taxation, land ownership, crime, administration. But it was designed to work alongside and not conflict with Islamic Sharia law, which handled things like marriage and inheritance.
So it created a predictable, stable system for everyone, whether you were a Muslim in Anatolia or a Christian in the Balkans.
Exactly. Everyone knew the rules. It clarified the relationship between the government and the people. And this legal framework was so successful, it basically held the empire together for the next 300 years.
And all this stability and wealth led to a cultural golden age. You can't talk about Suleiman without talking about his chief architect, Mimar Sinan.
Sinan was a true genius, the Ottoman Michelangelo, and he himself was a product of the Ottoman system. He was born a Christian, taken in the Devshirme levy, converted, and rose through the ranks as a military engineer to become the chief imperial architect.
And his work defines the Istanbul skyline to this day. What was his masterpiece?
It has to be the Suleimani Mosque. It's just breathtaking. It sits on one of Istanbul's hills, dominating the view. But it wasn't just a mosque.
It was a whole complex.
A whole community hub. It had schools, a hospital, a public bath, a library, a soup kitchen for the poor. It was a statement of imperial power, but also of civic responsibility and piety.
And this cultural flowering went beyond architecture.
Oh, absolutely. It was the peak for Ottoman arts, miniature paintings, ceramics, the famous Iznik tiles, textiles. And Suleiman himself was a part of it. He was a very accomplished poet. He wrote under the pen name Muhibi, which means the lover.
And that name, the lover, leads us right into the most dramatic and ultimately tragic human story of his entire reign. Hurrem Sultan.
Known in Europe as Roxolana. Her story is like something out of a fairy tale, or maybe a tragedy. She started as a slave, captured in a raid in what's now Ukraine, and brought to the imperial harem.
So she's just one of hundreds of women in the palace. How does she rise from that to become the most powerful woman in the empire's history?
It wasn't just about beauty. The sources say she captivated Suleiman with her intelligence, her wit, her personality. Her name, Hurrem, means the cheerful one. She was his intellectual partner, and together they broke every single Ottoman tradition.
What was the first big tradition she broke?
She got him to marry her, legally. No sultan had formally married a concubine for over 100 years. It was seen as politically dangerous because it created rival dynasties within the palace, but Suleiman did it.
And the second tradition she broke was even more shocking for the time.
Suleiman became monogamous. After Hurrem, he dismissed all his other concubines. This was revolutionary. The whole point of the harem system was for the sultan to have many sons by many different women to ensure the dynasty's survival. He threw that all away for her.
And we know this was a genuine love match. Their letters survive.
They're amazing. When he's away on campaign, they write to each other constantly, and they're so passionate. He calls her, my springtime, my cheerful-faced one, my sweetheart, my laughing leaf. This wasn't just politics. It was a real partnership.
And that partnership was political, too. She wasn't just hidden away in the harem.
Not at all. She corresponded with foreign kings. She commissioned huge public works hospitals, schools, soup kitchens, building her own power base and public image. She was a major political player.
But all this power leads to a very dark turn, doesn't it? It all comes down to the succession.
It does. Suleiman's eldest son and heir was Prince Mustafa. He was the son of another concubine, Mahidevran. And by all accounts, Mustafa was the perfect heir. Capable, popular, a skilled warrior, and absolutely beloved by the Janissaries.
But he wasn't Hurrem's son.
And that was the problem. Hurrem wanted one of her sons to inherit the throne. So in 1553, the tragedy happens. Suleiman is on campaign. He summons Mustafa to his tent. and has him strangled. The official charge was that Mustafa was plotting a rebellion.
But do we believe that? I mean, if he was so beloved by the army, wouldn't they have risen up?
That's the key question. The Janissaries were furious. They rioted. But they didn't mutiny against Suleiman himself. His authority was still absolute. However, most historians believe the plot was a fabrication.
Fabricated by Hurrem.
By Hurrem and her son-in-law, the Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha. They saw Mustafa as the one obstacle to their total power. They planted rumors, sowed suspicion, and convinced an aging, perhaps paranoid Suleiman that his most capable son was a traitor.
And the cost to the empire was huge.
It was devastatingly unpopular. People mourned Mustafa openly. Poems were written about the tragedy that became famous folk songs. The empire never really forgave Suleiman for it.
And the result was that Hurrem's son, Selim II, became the heir. A man who would go down in history with the nickname Selim the Drunkard.
Exactly. In their quest for power, they eliminated a brilliant heir and replaced him with a far less competent one. The seeds of the empire's future problems were sown right there, in that tent. So when Suleiman finally dies on campaign in 1566, the Ottoman Empire is, without a doubt, at its absolute peak.
Let's just take a final snapshot of that. Geographically, how vast was this empire?
It's hard to even comprehend. It's stretched across 3 continents, from Budapest in the north all the way down to Egypt and Aden in the south, from Algiers in the west, across the Middle East, to Baghdad in the east. It covered something like 100 different peoples.
And in terms of population and wealth, how did it stack up against, say, Europe?
There was no comparison. The population was maybe 20 to 30 million people. The only state on earth that could rival it in terms of power and wealth was Ming China. Istanbul itself was one of the biggest cities in the world, with maybe 700,000 people.
A true global hub.
The center of world trade, silk, spices, gold. It all flowed through the Grand Bazaar. It was cosmopolitan, it was rich, it was magnificent.
And militarily, they were unstoppable.
Pretty much. The Janissaries were the best infantry in the world. Their cavalry, the Sipahis, were legendary. Their artillery was second to none. No single European power could have stood against the full might of the Ottoman army at that point.
So we've seen this incredible story, from a tiny state that almost got wiped out to this absolute superpower under Suleiman.
It's an amazing story of conquest, of state building, of cultural achievement, and it's all driven by these incredible larger-than-life figures. Mehmed's obsession, Hurrem's ambition, Mustafa's tragedy.
And yet, here's the final thought. Right here at the absolute peak, at the moment of its greatest glory, the seeds of its future decline were already being planted.
That is the ultimate paradox. The outward strength was total, but the internal system was becoming fragile. The succession was now a game of harem intrigue. By eliminating heirs like Mustafa, they ensured that future sultans would be less experienced and often less capable. The very passion and ambition that built this golden age also created the instability that would eventually, slowly, begin to unravel it.
That's a fascinating idea, that this massive, powerful empire was maintained, even for decades after Suleiman, on this terrifying internal knife's edge of passion, murder, and intrigue. The glory was real, but it was built on a